A sunny afternoon on a pristine golf course. A millionaire thinks he can show off his power by striking his pregnant wife with a golf club, while his mistress laughs by his side. But he has no idea who he is really up against, because the moment her father, a powerful CEO, steps forward with evidence in hand, the game changes forever. What follows is a clash of arrogance, betrayal, and the shocking revenge that leaves an empire in ruins. Trust me, you will not see the ending coming until we dive in. Let us know what time you are watching and where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We would love to hear from you. The sun was shining on manicured grass, and the sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter floated through the air. It was a charity golf event, the kind of gathering where reputations were polished as carefully as the clubs in their bags. Millionaires, CEOs, and socialites strolled in pressed suits and tailored dresses. Photographers drifted from group to group, capturing smiles that would soon appear on glossy society pages. To the outside world, it was another display of wealth and privilege, an afternoon where nothing could disturb the illusion of control. But illusion never lasts. Near the 12th hole, where a crowd had gathered to watch the host deliver a ceremonial swing, tension was already brewing. The millionaire's wife, visibly pregnant, stood a few steps behind him. She wore a pale dress that clung softly to her figure, her hands resting protectively on her belly. There was unease in her eyes, but she forced herself to smile for the cameras, hoping no one would notice the storm behind that smile. Beside her, like a shadow, was the mistress. She was younger, bold, dressed in a crimson skirt that caught the light like fire. She leaned close to the millionaire, her hand brushing his arm with an intimacy that was not hidden but flaunted. Guests noticed, whispers spreading in hushed waves. The pregnant wife looked away, her lips pressed tight. Then the mistress spoke, her voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of conversation. "She is in the way," she sneered. "Show everyone where your loyalty is." Her words were not whispered. They were a challenge meant for the entire crowd. The millionaire's grip tightened around the golf club. At first, it seemed like a joke, the kind of drunken bravado that sometimes spilled out at these events. But the look on his face told another story. His jaw clenched, his skin flushed red, his eyes locked on his wife with a fury that belonged not to love, but to betrayal and rage. He stepped forward. The crowd stilled, unsure of what was about to happen. Some thought he was about to scold her, others imagined a heated argument, but no one expected what followed. The club swung downward with a whistle through the air. It did not strike her full force, but the threat was undeniable. The pregnant woman stumbled back, shielding her stomach with both arms. A cry ripped from her throat, echoed by the horrified gasp of the guests around them. The mistress laughed. Yes, she laughed, the cruel sound ringing out across the green. "That is what she deserves," she said loudly, as if daring anyone to disagree. The music that had been playing over the loudspeakers cut off abruptly. Glasses slipped from hands. A child nearby began to cry. Every phone in the crowd lifted, as if pulled by a single instinct. Screens lit up, recording the unthinkable. A millionaire attacking his pregnant wife on a golf course, urged on by the woman who had stolen his affection. The pregnant wife fell to her knees, clutching her belly, her tears blurring the green grass beneath her. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, but her voice was swallowed by the buzzing panic of the audience. One man dropped his drink. Another woman screamed. A ripple of disbelief spread like wildfire. It was no longer a charity event, no longer an afternoon of power and prestige. It had become a crime scene in front of 100 witnesses. And in that frozen moment, as the crowd looked on in stunned silence, one thought burned in every mind. No one at the golf course could believe what they had just seen. Silence fell across the golf course like a heavy curtain. Moments before there had been polite chatter, the soft clink of champagne glasses, and the distant sound of cameras snapping photos. Now there was only the ragged sound of a woman's breathing and the scattered cries of shock from those too horrified to look away. The pregnant wife was on her knees, her dress torn, her face streaked with tears. Her hands trembled as they clutched her stomach, protecting the fragile life inside. A gasp rippled through the guests. Some covered their mouths, others whispered in disbelief. A man muttered, "I cannot believe what he just did," and his words were quickly echoed in hushed tones across the crowd. The shock was collective. a wave of outrage and fear that no one could stop. The golf club still rested in the millionaire's hand, the polished wood glinting in the sunlight like a weapon of humiliation. He had not struck her with the full force of his strength, but the image was enough. It was carved into the memory of everyone present, a wound that would not heal easily. The mistress smirked, folding her arms as if she had orchestrated the scene, basking in the discomfort that her presence had created. The pregnant wife tried to steady herself, pressing one palm against the ground to rise. Her fingers dug into the grass, the manicured blades bending under the weight of her struggle. A tear rolled down her cheek, fell onto the green, and vanished into the soil. She whispered something that few could hear, a faint prayer for strength, or perhaps for mercy. The crowd shifted uneasily. Phones were raised, their red recording lights glowing like watchful eyes. A young woman whispered to her friend, "The whole world is going to see this," and the thought spread quickly. A scandal was unfolding in real time, one that would not be silenced. The mistress leaned in close to the millionaire and hissed, "She is pathetic! End this now!" Her words carried enough venom to silence the faint murmurs around them. The wife flinched at the sound, her shoulders shaking as another sob escaped her lips. One of the guests, an older woman in pearls, finally stepped forward. Her voice was trembling but firm. "Stop this! She is pregnant! This is madness!" But the millionaire ignored her, his expression a mask of arrogance and rage. He shook his head, as if dismissing not only his wife's pain but also the judgment of every person around him. The weight of silence returned. The music was still absent. The only sounds were the faint clicks of cameras and the labored breathing of the wife who fought to remain conscious. She looked up, her eyes searching the crowd, hoping for someone to intervene. But most looked away, paralyzed by fear or uncertainty. Her mascara had smudged into black streaks. Her lips quivered as she tried to form words. Finally, in a voice that cracked under the pressure, she said, "Please, someone, help me." The plea pierced the atmosphere like a blade, forcing even those who wanted to remain neutral to confront the cruelty before them. A man in the back muttered angrily, "This is abuse, not love," and others nodded. Yet still no one crossed the invisible line that separated witness from participant. The shame of inaction clung to them, a reminder that they were allowing a pregnant woman to suffer in plain sight. The golf course, once a symbol of wealth and elegance, had transformed into a stage of cruelty. The grass still shimmered under the sun, but its beauty had been stained by tears. The air, once filled with light conversation, now felt suffocating with tension. And as the wife bent her head, clutching her belly with both hands, the guests stood frozen, their whispers rising like a chorus of disbelief. The memory of what they had just seen pressed down on them. No one could erase it. No one could deny it. It was no longer an afternoon of leisure. It was the aftermath of a crime, witnessed by everyone, and carried in silence that spoke louder than any scream. The silence on the golf course did not last long. Whispers grew louder, phones continued recording, and guests shifted uncomfortably. Every eye was fixed on the millionaire, waiting for him to correct his mistake, to reach down and help his wife, or at least to show a hint of shame. For a fleeting second, it seemed possible that he might. His grip loosened slightly on the golf club. His chest heaved with heavy breaths, and his face twitched as though torn between pride and guilt. Then the mistress placed her hand firmly on his shoulder. Her nails, painted deep red, pressed against his tailored jacket like talons marking territory. She leaned close, her lips brushing his ear, and whispered words that were not private but deliberate, loud enough for those in the front row to hear. "She does not deserve your sympathy. She is holding you back. Look at her, weak, pathetic." The millionaire's expression hardened. His jaw clenched once more, his eyes narrowed, and whatever hesitation had lived inside him disappeared. He looked at his wife, still crouched on the grass, clutching her stomach with trembling arms. Instead of compassion, his face filled with contempt. "She wanted this," he shouted, his voice cracking across the stunned crowd. "Do not be fooled. She pushed me to it. Always nagging, always ungrateful. She has no love for me. She only wants money." The words struck harder than the golf club ever could. The pregnant wife froze, her tears still streaming, but her gaze lifted to meet his. There was no recognition in his face, no memory of vows, No hint of the man she once loved. There was only betrayal. The mistress smirked, emboldened by his declaration. She stepped forward, heels clicking against the paved path near the green, and folded her arms. "Everyone can see it now," she announced with mock sweetness. "He has chosen me, not her, me." The crowd reacted with a mix of outrage and disbelief. One guest muttered angrily, "This is disgusting," while another raised her phone higher, determined to capture every second. But the millionaire seemed oblivious. He turned to the guests and waved the club in the air, as though making a public proclamation. "Do not believe her tears," he barked. "She has been manipulating me for years. She is jealous of true love. She cannot stand to see me happy with someone who actually cares for me." The wife gasped at the cruelty of his word. Her lips quivered as she tried to speak, but no sound emerged. Her mascara-stained face was pale, her body shaking under the weight of humiliation. The mistress tilted her chin upward and added, "He belongs to me now, and everyone should get used to it." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the last remnants of silence, daring anyone to oppose her. Guests exchanged glances of horror. A few whispered, "He is protecting the mistress," as if saying it aloud would make the reality less surreal. But there was no denying it. In front of witnesses, cameras, and flashing lenses, the millionaire had turned his back on his pregnant wife and publicly aligned himself with the woman who had provoked the violence. One guest finally spoke up, his voice trembling with outrage. "You should be ashamed. She is carrying your child." The millionaire laughed bitterly. "That child will never tie me to her. I am free now, free to live the life I deserve." The mistress clapped her hands slowly, enjoying the performance, each sound echoing in the tense silence. The wife lowered her head, the betrayal cutting deeper than the pain in her body. And as the crowd looked on, the truth became clear. He had chosen humiliation over honor, selfishness over responsibility, and cruelty over compassion. The husband had not just failed his wife, he had destroyed the very image of himself in front of everyone who mattered. The golf course had not recovered from the shock, yet the mistress seemed to thrive in the chaos. Where others shifted uncomfortably and lowered their voices, she straightened her back and let her confidence grow taller than the trees that lined the fairway. The crimson skirt she wore shimmered under the sunlight, drawing every eye to her as if she were the true host of the event. She took a step forward, her heels clicking against the stone path with deliberate rhythm. Each sound was a statement. Each movement was designed to command attention. She smiled, not the smile of grace or warmth, but the smirk of someone who believed she had finally won. "Do you all see it now?" she said loudly, her voice ringing out over the hushed crowd. "He is mine. He has chosen me. There is no room for her anymore." Her hand gestured dismissively toward the pregnant wife, still trembling on the grass. A murmur of outrage rippled through the guests, but none dared to step closer. Phones continued to record, the glowing screens documenting every word she spoke. The mistress seemed to relish the cameras. She turned toward them as though she were addressing a live audience. She lifted her hand, revealing a glittering diamond bracelet. The stone caught the sunlight and threw a cold spark into the eyes of those who watched. "This," she said, shaking her wrist with satisfaction, "is proof of his devotion. Not a gift of pity, not a gesture of duty, but a symbol of love. Real love." The pregnant wife gasped softly. Her eyes widened as she recognized the bracelet. It had been promised to her months earlier, chosen together at a boutique, meant to mark their anniversary. Now it glittered on the wrist of the woman who had torn her marriage apart. The mistress noticed the recognition and smirked wider. "Oh yes," she whispered cruelly, leaning closer to the wife so others could hear. "It was supposed to be yours, but he gave it to me instead, because I am the one he truly values." Guests exchanged horrified glances. Some muttered under their breath, words like shameless and disgrace. But still the mistress basked in their disgust, as if hatred was only more proof of her victory. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a photo, a glossy print that had no business being in her hands. She held it up for the crowd to see. It was a picture of her and the millionaire on a private beach, their arms wrapped around each other, lips pressed together in a kiss that betrayed months of secrecy. "This is the truth," she declared, waving the photo like evidence in a trial. "We are not hiding anymore. She was the past. I am the future." The crowd gasped. A woman covered her mouth. Another man muttered a curse under his breath. The pregnant wife shook her head slowly, tears streaking her face as she whispered, "How could you?" The mistress only laughed, a sound that carried no joy, only triumph. "Because he belongs to me," she said with sharp certainty. She tilted her chin high, her eyes sweeping across the witnesses, daring anyone to challenge her. The millionaire stood beside her, nodding, as though her words were gospel. He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining in a show of unity. Together they faced the stunned guests, presenting themselves as the couple who no longer needed to hide. And in that moment, it became clear. The mistress was not just claiming the millionaire, she was claiming the stage, the wealth, the power, and the right to humiliate his pregnant wife in front of the world. What should have been a day of elegance had become a theater of cruelty, and the mistress reveled in her starring role. The mistress's smug display should have been the end of the humiliation, but the millionaire was not finished. His pride had been challenged, and his ego demanded control. He could not tolerate the sight of guests whispering, their phones raised high, their eyes filled with disgust. He needed to reassert his dominance. He needed everyone to believe that he still held all the power. He dropped the golf club onto the grass, the metallic thud echoing in the silence. Then he straightened his jacket, ran a hand through his hair, and stepped forward as if he were about to deliver a keynote speech at a conference. His voice was cold and sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "You think she is the victim," he said, pointing to his pregnant wife who still trembled on the ground. "But you do not know the truth. Without me, she is nothing. Without me, she has no home, no money, no future. She should be grateful for everything I have given her." The wife lifted her face, streaked with tears, and shook her head slowly. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came. The crowd waited, expecting her to argue, but she remained silent. Her silence gave him confidence. He turned back to the audience, his voice louder now, his chest swelling with arrogance. "Do you see this?" He gestured toward her swollen belly. "She thinks carrying my child will make her untouchable. She thinks she can trap me, but she is wrong. That child will never tie me down. I will decide what happens to it, and I will decide what happens to her." Gasps rippled through the crowd. One woman muttered, "This is monstrous." Another guest raised his phone higher, recording every word. But the millionaire seemed to welcome the attention. He thrived on the stage, intoxicated by his own performance. He stepped closer to his wife, looming over her. His voice dropped to a threatening growl. "If you walk away, you will have nothing. No house, no money, no rights. I will make sure of it. With one phone call, I can freeze every account, cancel every card, and leave you begging for scraps." The wife flinched, pressing her hands tighter against her belly. Her sobs grew heavier, her shoulders shaking. The mistress smirked, resting her hand on the millionaire's arm as if encouraging him to continue. "And custody," he sneered. "Do not think for 1 second that the child is yours alone. With my resources, I can take it from you. Judges, listen to men like me. Lawyers, obey men like me. If I want, I will raise this child with her." He jerked his chin toward the mistress, who nodded with cruel satisfaction. The words hung in the air like poison. The crowd recoiled, some whispering, others shaking their heads in disbelief. One man whispered angrily, "This is not love, this is control." Still, the millionaire pressed on. He raised his phone, waving it in the air. "I have people on speed dial. A single call, and she will be out on the street. A single call, and she will never see a penny again. Remember that, before you judge me. Power is mine, not hers." The guests shifted uneasily. Some wanted to intervene, others wanted to leave, but all of them felt the weight of his threats. The image of a man who once appeared successful and charming had crumbled into something far darker. His wife, however, did not collapse completely. She looked up at him, her eyes wet but steady for the first time that day. She did not speak yet, but in that silence there was a flicker of defiance. It was faint, but it was there, waiting. The millionaire did not notice. He was too consumed by his performance, too eager to remind the world of his power. But the crowd could feel it. His threats, his cruelty, his arrogance, they were pushing her to a breaking point, and when that point came, the balance of power would shift. The millionaire's threats had left the crowd unsettled, but what came next shattered the thin barrier between cruelty and spectacle. He had not yet reached the peak of his performance. and his mistress urged him forward with a sly smile, her hand brushing his arm like a conductor guiding an orchestra. The golf course had turned into his stage, and the audience could not look away. He pulled a folded stack of papers from his inner jacket pocket. The pages fluttered in the breeze, the crisp white edges glowing under the sunday. He held them up for everyone to see. "Here it is," he announced, his voice filled with triumph. "The divorce agreement, the end of this charade." A hush fell over the guests. Some gasped, others whispered. One man muttered in disbelief. He brought the papers to a charity event. The mistress chuckled, her laughter cutting into the silence like broken glass. The millionaire dropped the papers onto a small table near the refreshments. He pulled a pen from his pocket and slammed it down on top. The sound echoed, sharp and final. He turned toward his wife, still kneeling in the grass, her dress smeared with dirt and her mascara running down her cheeks. "Get up," he ordered coldly. "Sign it. Sign it in front of everyone. Show them that this marriage is over and that you accept your place." The wife's lips trembled. She shook her head slowly, whispering, "Please, not here. Not like this." Her voice was fragile, nearly lost in the wind, but those closest to her heard and flinched at the desperation behind it. The mistress stepped closer, towering over her with a look of mock sympathy. "Do it," she said softly, though her words were laced with venom. "End it now. Save yourself the embarrassment. Everyone already knows the truth." Phones lifted higher, recording every second. The audience had become a sea of glowing screens, each one a witness, each one a potential weapon. The millionaire basked in it, his chest swelling with pride. He leaned down, his shadow falling across his wife. "Sign, or you will leave with nothing," he growled. "No house, no money, no child. You will be erased. Do you understand? Erased." The wife stared at the papers, her vision blurred by tears. Her hands shook as she reached out, her fingers grazing the pen. For a moment, it seemed she would obey, crushed under the weight of humiliation. But her sobs caught in her throat, and she froze. Her body trembled as the crowd held its breath. Then she pulled her hand back and clutched her stomach protectively, refusing to take the pen. The millionaire's face twisted with rage. He grabbed the pen, forced it into her hand, and slammed her wrist down against the table. "You will sign," he hissed, his voice so loud that even the birds seemed to scatter. Gasps erupted from the crowd. One woman screamed, "Stop it!" A man shouted, "This is abuse!" Yet still no one stepped forward. They were frozen by the spectacle, by the audacity of his cruelty. The wife cried out as the pen pressed against her fingers. She fought weakly, her sobs echoing across the fairway. The mistress clapped her hands once, delighted by the scene. "Finally," she said with a wicked grin. "The world will see her stripped of everything." "Oh." The millionaire forced the pen down, dragging her trembling hand toward the line on the paper. The ink smeared, not yet forming a signature, but enough to stain the page with evidence of his coercion. It was the breaking point. The whispers became shouts. Guests cried out, their voices rising against the act unfolding before them. Phone zoomed in closer, capturing the image of a pregnant woman being forced to sign her life away under the pressure of her husband's hand. And as the sun blazed overhead, turning the scene into a cruel spotlight, one truth rang clear across the stunned crowd. He was not simply ending a marriage, he was destroying her dignity, publicly, mercilessly, with every witness watching. The pen trembled in her hand, pressed down by his force, the papers threatening to claim her future in front of everyone. The millionaire's grip was unrelenting, his face twisted in fury as he barked for her to sign. The mistress leaned in, smiling like a queen awaiting her coronation, certain that victory was moments away. The crowd held its breath, watching the pregnant wife teeter on the edge of surrender. Then something shifted. The wife's sobs slowed, her breathing steadied, though her body still trembled from pain. She stared down at the paper, at the ink smeared across the page, and then she closed her eyes. For a brief second, silence swallowed the chaos. When she opened them again, her eyes no longer carried only fear. They carried resolve. She yanked her hand free, the pen clattering to the ground. Gasps erupted. The millionaire stumbled back half a step, shocked by the sudden strength from the woman he believed broken. The mistress's smile faltered, her confidence shaken for the first time. The wife pushed herself to her feet, unsteady but unyielding. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her voice trembling but rising above the silence. "No," she said firmly, her words sharp as glass. "I will not sign. I will not let you erase me. I will not let you destroy my child's future." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some gasped, others whispered in awe. It was not loud, yet her words carried more power than the millionaire's shouting ever had. The mistress scoffed, stepping forward. "Do not pretend to be strong now," she sneered. "Everyone can see what you are. Weak, pitiful, abandoned." But the wife straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin. "Weak?" she repeated, her voice gaining strength with every word. "You mistake kindness for weakness. You mistake love for weakness. But I am not weak, not anymore." The millionaire slammed his fist against the table, rattling the glasses and startling those closest to him. "Enough!" he shouted. "You think a little speech will change anything? I own everything. I control everything. You are nothing without me." She turned to him, her eyes burning with defiance. "No, you are wrong. You are nothing without me. You built your empire on lies and betrayal, and you think no one will see it, but everyone sees it now." Phones captured her words, the crowd pressing closer, their whispers swelling into a chorus of support. Someone clapped once, hesitant but sincere. Another voice called out, "Stand strong!" The tide was shifting. The mistress grabbed the millionaire's arm, hissing, "Stop listening to her. Finish it. Take her down now." But his eyes betrayed uncertainty. For the first time, he looked rattled, unsure how to respond to a wife who refused to crumble. The wife stepped forward, closer to him than she had dared all day. Her belly rose with each deep breath, her hands steady at her sides. "You thought I would stay silent," she said, her voice clear, cutting through the air like a bell. "You thought I would bow to your cruelty, but I will not. Not today, not ever again." The crowd broke into applause, small at first, then louder as more voices joined. The sound swelled, filling the golf course with a force that belonged not to wealth or arrogance, but to truth. The millionaire's face twisted, his confidence cracking. The mistress pulled at his arm, desperate to restore control, but the ground beneath them was shifting. The wife had stood tall, and with her defiance, the power in the room had begun to move. What had been humiliation was turning into resistance. What had been weakness was transforming into strength. And though the battle was far from over, one thing was undeniable. She was no longer a victim. She was becoming the voice that neither money nor cruelty could silence. The air was electric. The wife's refusal had broken the spell of silence, and her voice of defiance still lingered in the ears of every guest. The millionaire's arrogance wavered, the mistress's composure cracked, and the crowd, once passive, had begun to stir with applause and support. But the moment that would shatter the last remnants of his control had yet to come. It came in the form of footsteps. From the edge of the crowd, steady and deliberate, a tall figure began to walk forward. His presence parted the onlookers like a tide retreating from the shore. He was older, his hair silver at the temples, his suit immaculate, his stride calm but commanding. The guests turned their heads, whispers growing louder with every step. There was recognition in some faces, shock in others, but all eyes were drawn to him. The wife gasped. Her trembling hand rose instinctively to her mouth, and her eyes filled with new tears, not of fear but of release. "Father," she whispered, though the word was lost beneath the swell of voices. The man stopped just a few feet from the table where the divorce papers lay. He placed a leather briefcase onto the surface with a quiet authority that silenced the crowd. His voice followed, deep and unwavering. "Enough," he said. "This ends now." The millionaire spun around, startled, his face paling. "Who are you to interfere?" he demanded, though his voice faltered with uncertainty. The older man adjusted his cufflinks, lifted his chin, and replied, "I am her father, and I am also the CEO whose influence makes yours look like dust." He opened the briefcase, pulling out a thick stack of documents bound neatly in folders. He laid them out, one by one, the papers heavy with proof. "These are records," he announced, holding the first folder high. "Transactions you thought no one noticed, fraudulent transfers, hidden accounts, illegal deals made in the shadows of your empire, all traced back to you." Gasps tore through the crowd. Guests craned their necks to see, phones zoomed in closer, and the whispers swelled into a storm. The millionaire's mouth opened and closed, no words forming, his arrogance melting into dread. The mistress tried to laugh, though the sound cracked. Lies, all of it. Do not believe him. He is only trying to protect her. The father's gaze cut to her, sharp as steel. Protect her? Yes. But also expose you. Do you really think your messages would stay hidden? He pulled out another document. This time, glossy photographs clipped to the top. Here are the emails. Here are the photos. The world will see not only your cruelty, but your conspiracy. You wanted her destroyed, but you left a trail of evidence that leads straight back to you both. The mistress froze, her face draining of color. The crowd gasped again, voices rising into shocked cries. Someone shouted, "Show us!" And phones rose higher, capturing every detail. The millionaire stepped back, sweat dripping down his forehead. His voice trembled. "This is not possible. I covered my tracks." The father's tone was calm, almost pitying. "You thought money could bury the truth, but you underestimated the one thing you could never control: family. And today, family is the reason your empire will fall." The wife stood taller, the strength in her father's presence flowing into her. She stepped to his side, her hand brushing the documents he had laid out. For the first time that day, her lips curved into a faint but steady smile. The father placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You are not alone anymore," he said firmly, his voice carrying to the farthest edges of the crowd. "And he will answer for everything." The audience erupted, cheers and clapping echoing across the course. Phones flashed, recording the moment that would spread across every platform within hours. The tide had turned. The humiliation that once seemed final had been ripped apart by truth and power. And the millionaire, pale and trembling, could only stand frozen, staring at the man who had just dismantled his empire with a single appearance. The moment the father laid the evidence on the table, the energy of the golf course shifted completely. What had once been whispers of shock became a roar of vindication. Guests leaned forward, their phones raised higher, recording every second of the millionaire's unraveling. The applause that had begun as a ripple was now a storm, each clap hammering against his crumbling pride. The millionaire's face drained of color. His once steady posture sagged, his shoulders drooping, as though the weight of the documents pressed him down. Sweat dripped down his forehead, staining the collar of his designer shirt. His lips trembled, searching for excuses, but no words came. He stumbled back a step, gripping the edge of the table for balance. His eyes darted wildly around the crowd, looking for a single sympathetic face, but finding only contempt and disgust. The people who had once admired him now recoiled, whispering accusations, shaking their heads. A guest muttered, "He is finished," and the words spread like wildfire. The mistress tried to salvage the moment. She forced a laugh, shrill and unsteady, and raised her hands. "Do not believe this nonsense," she shouted. "He is lying. He is only trying to protect her. You all know the truth. He loves me, not her." She tugged at the millionaire's arm, urging him to stand tall, but he pulled away. His hand shook violently as he lifted it, pressing it to his forehead. "No," he whispered, almost to himself. "This cannot be happening. I covered everything. I made sure." His voice cracked, a broken sound that betrayed his fear. The father stood firm, unmoved by the spectacle. "You cannot cover the truth," he said clearly, his words cutting through the chaos. "And now the world will see you for what you are." Phones buzzed as notifications lit up screens. News alerts began to spread in real time. Headlines flashed across social feeds. "Millionaire attacks pregnant wife at charity event." "CEO father exposes fraud." Public outrage spreads. The speed was relentless, the story unstoppable. The mistress's composure shattered. Her hands shook as she fumbled with her clutch, dropping it to the ground. She crouched to retrieve it, but her body stiffened, her face pale as she realized cameras were zooming in on her panic. She clutched her purse to her chest, eyes wide, scanning the crowd for an escape. Reporters who had slipped into the event pushed forward. A microphone was shoved in her direction. "Do you deny your involvement in the fraud?" a voice demanded. Another asked, "Were you aware of the violence before today?" The mistress opened her mouth, but no words came. Only a choked sound escaped. Her arrogance dissolved into humiliation. The millionaire collapsed into a chair, his head buried in his hands. He rocked slightly, muttering fragments of disbelief. "No, not like this, not in front of them." His empire, built on intimidation and deceit, was collapsing in real time, and every guest was a witness. The father spoke again, his voice calm but commanding. "You thought money made you untouchable, but money cannot silence truth, and it cannot erase what you did here today." The crowd erupted in agreement. Guests shouted, "Justice!" and "He should be arrested." The chorus of condemnation grew louder, drowning out the millionaire's whimpers. The wife stood quietly beside her father, her hands folded over her belly, her tears replaced by a solemn calm. She had endured humiliation, pain, and betrayal, but now she watched as justice began to claim the man who had tried to destroy her. The mistress buried her face in her hands. The millionaire sat trembling, stripped of power, and the crowd, once silent, now stood as witnesses to the collapse of a man who believed he could never fall. The collapse of the millionaire had been swift, but the conclusion was still to come. The golf course, once a symbol of wealth and leisure, had transformed into a courtroom without walls. Every guest stood as witness, every phone recorded the final act, and every whisper confirmed the truth. The man who had boasted of power now sat trembling in disgrace, and the mistress who once flaunted her arrogance cowered in shame. Into that silence, the father spoke once more. His voice carried the weight of authority, not through anger, but through calm certainty. "This is over," he declared. "The law will handle what remains, but today, justice begins here." The crowd erupted in applause, the sound washing over the wife like a tide of vindication. She stood tall beside her father, her hand resting on her belly, her face pale but resolute. For the first time that day, her shoulders no longer slumped under humiliation. They squared with quiet strength. Two uniformed officers, alerted by the growing scene and the flood of reports on social media, stepped forward through the crowd. Their presence shifted the atmosphere from chaos to order. They approached the millionaire, their voices firm. "Sir, you are under investigation for assault. You will need to come with us." The millionaire lifted his head, eyes wild with disbelief. "No, you cannot. I am untouchable. I own this city." His words sounded hollow, desperate, even childish. The officers did not flinch. They pulled him to his feet, ignoring his frantic protests. The crowd cheered as he was led away, his shouts swallowed by the sound of cameras, flashing, and voices chanting for accountability. The mistress tried to slip away quietly, but reporters closed in around her. "Did you encourage the assault?" one shouted. "Were you involved in the fraud?" Another pressed. Her lips trembled, her eyes darting frantically, but no defense came. She stumbled back into the shadows, her power dissolved like mist under the morning Sunday. The wife remained, no longer the victim in the eyes of the crowd, but the survivor who had endured the storm. Strangers who had once whispered in pity now looked at her with admiration. A woman in pearls approached, her voice warm. "You were brave," she said softly. "You did not bow. Do not forget that." Others echoed their support, offering words of encouragement that wove together into a chorus of respect. Her father placed an arm gently around her shoulders. "It is finished," he told her. "You are free. You and your child are safe now." His words carried more comfort than wealth ever could. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, feeling the weight that had pressed on her chest finally lift. For the first time, in what felt like years, her breaths were steady. Her tears no longer burned with shame. They glistened with release. The cameras continued to flash, the phones continued to record, and the world continued to watch. But she no longer felt exposed. She felt seen. She felt heard. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold, the wife stood tall on the grass where she had once fallen. The same ground that had been stained by her tears now bore witness to her strength. She looked at the crowd, at her father, at the space where her husband had been dragged away, and she spoke one final sentence, clear and resolute. "No power can hide the truth. Not money, not lies, not cruelty. The truth will always win." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices carrying across the course, echoing like a hymn of justice. And with that, the story closed not on her humiliation, but on her liberation.